Tonight I've been quickly playing with getting the valve gear, the valves themselves, out of the Riley 9 head. The head on these is a bit odd because it's a truly, lift it up, a truly hemispherical combustion chamber. So they're completely round, and you can sort of see one of the valves in there. The valves are at 45 degrees, which is why the head's this funny shape. And it makes it a bit tricky to get the valve springs compressed so you can get the little pins out so you can pull the valves out. The manuals talk about having a wooden board with little square blocks that fit up in here to stop the valves dropping down, and then basically the pictures show sort of pressing down on the spring with a big screwdriver. The idea is to push the spring down far enough that you can pull out the little slotted bar that actually holds the springs in place. These valves have been fitted with double springs and they're very strong, so I can barely push those down at all, and there's no way I could do it with a screwdriver with one hand while trying to pull this little pin out with the other. And one of the problems I found was my conventional valve spring compressor didn't really work, because you can't, normally you'd sort of put it like that, but because the head's at this funny angle, that doesn't work. So what I've done is I've used the little wooden block idea, and I've made up this little wooden piece. This is the little wooden block that fits into the combustion chamber to stop the valve dropping down. And what I found is I can use the valve spring compressor sort of across the head. So it needs to go on sort of that way. It's a bit tricky to do this with one hand. I'll clamp it in place and you can see what I mean. With the spring compressor in place, you can see how I got this to work. I got the angle slightly wrong on this. I didn't make this block quite big enough. So the pad on the compressor is actually across the corner there, but that seems to be working better because it holds it in place. If I turn this around, you can see how the compressor is on top of the valves there. I've already put a little bit of tension on it, so you can see the little cross pin is loose. So then all I've been doing, I'll do this standing out of the way of the valves, is crank this down just by hand, and then you can actually get the little bar out. And then I've been covering this in an old towel just so things don't go flying off, and then we can just reduce the tension. You might be wondering why I didn't just use the normal spring compressor in this position. I just found it took too much force to try and compress it down to get it over center so it locks. Once I've got the tension off, I can unlock it, and my valve parts go flying. But if we take a look at this, I can now get the springs off, and you can see the double springs. The springs are always, when they're doubled like this, they're always wound in the opposite direction, so they don't bind up, they don't sort of lock together. With that removed, you can just pop the valve out, so you can see how the valves open and close there. These all look fairly new. There's a bit of dirt on them. This one's been cleaned up. You can see it's not new because there's a little bit of pitting on it, but you can see how the spring's held in place with the little hole there, and how the little keeper goes through, and there's a little cup on the end, and the keeper of course fits across that, so that when the spring tension is on it, there's no way this can come loose. So that's all the valves out now. And what I want to do is I'm just going to clean this up. I just wanted to make sure the valves were ground in nicely and correctly. I'll probably just give them a light grind. I'll clean all of this up and repaint it. The studs all look fine. And then that should be ready for reassembly. It does... I've been trying to figure out if this one's been broken and then sort of welded up or brazed up or something, because there is some indication of that on the corners. Whoops. Let me just have a look. Sort of in there and in here. So I don't know if this has been broken and repaired, but it all seems solid enough, so we'll see how that goes. If I look at the... If I look in there, you can see there is a bit of carbon, a bit like R2-D2, a little bit of carbon scoring in there. So I'll probably try and clean that up, but I'm not going to do anything to these heads. The seating all looks okay. I'll just sort of flush it out and clean it up a little bit and go with that. All the guides seem to be new because there's no play in those whatsoever, which is good. And all the valves are definitely reusable, and the springs all look reusable. It just all needs a good cleanup. And then I'm just waiting for some parts from the UK, and then hopefully I can get all the rotating assembly figured out and balanced as soon as I figure out the clutch.